see, I'm Gatsby.
F. Scott Fitzgerald uses an assortment of colors to derive hidden meanings from throughout The Great Gatsby. Perhaps one of the most underanalyzed colors in his novel is gray.
Gray is a color that symbolizes the hopelessness, poverty, and unimportance of various subjects throughout the novel. Let's start with the Valley of Ashes. The barren and shallow world is placed between the East Egg and the West Egg, the rat hole of the city, devoid of pomp and circumstance that embodies its borders.
The Valley of Ashes is constantly seen as a lifeless place. Its inhabitants are those who have been stuck in the lower parts of society for their entire lives. It represents the degeneration of the American dream and the failures of mankind in attempts to ascend the social or economic ladder.
Occasionally, a line of gray cars crawls along an invisible track, gives out a ghastly creak, and comes to rest. And immediately the ash gray men swarm up with leaden spades and stir up an impenetrable cloud which screens their obscure operations from your sight.
Notice how often the word gray is mentioned. The gray cars, the gray men, and the gray atmosphere that seems to be choking the Valley of Ashes. It emphasizes the desperation and poverty that the people who live there experience daily, and that the main characters of the story are blind to this suffering. Also, in the movie, the main character's rich, colorful outfits greatly contrast the bleak gray, tan, and black coloration of the Valley of Ashes.
This is something I always...
I didn't know what kind of car it was. What?
From early on in the book, you can tell that George Wilson, a mechanic living in the Valley of Ashes, is destined to not ever be able to achieve the American dream and destined for a bitter end. His desperation to hold on to things he holds dear and the stressful tenor that he exhorts convinces readers of this. The movie depicts him to be a pale, stressed out in appearance, and nervous young man.
Wilson didn't deserve his position in life. He was a minor character of the worst of conditions beset upon him. Wilson appears to blend into the background, oblivious to his wife's affairs and nervous about his future. Fitzgerald mentions that he was mingling immediately with the cement color of the walls. A white ashen dust veiled his dark suit and his pale hair as it veiled everything else in the vicinity, except his wife, who moved close to Tom.
Myrtle, by being with Wilson, is also subject to the unimportance and poverty that comes along with living in the Valley of Ashes. However, when she is with Tom, her life begins to take a more colorful turn. Her entire environment is ashen and dark except for her. Without Tom, she is no different from her husband, but with him, she gets a glimpse of what it's like to be wealthy and fortuitous East Egger.
By the time Myrtle gets the bad end of the deer in the headlight situation, Wilson's lack of life and failures that just barely held him together snapped, and more unfortunately, he went on to commit murder. But before he decides on it, he stares out his window. Wilson's glazed eyes turned out to the ash heaps, where small gray clouds took on fantastic shape and scurried here and there in the faint dawn wind. The gray clouds represent the loss and scarcity of hope at best, consuming what was left of poor Wilson's life. The movie portrays this by what is exactly stated in the book: a stormy night with a gray overtone, dreary and forbidding.
Jordan Baker is also described as gray, or at least her eyes are depicted to be gray sun-singed eyes. This subtle detail is mentioned twice in the book, and it represents her amoral personality of lying and cheating. This is another thing the color gray goes on to symbolize, the lack of a moral compass. Indeed, the movie complements Jordan Baker's persona with these same gray eyes.
When Gatsby first met Daisy after 5 years, he turned from awkward to overjoyed to a stern realization that Tom still existed. In the second stage, Gatsby and Daisy are exploring Gatsby's house, and the gray windows disappeared as the house glowed full of light. This means that the grayness, the lack of life that was Gatsby as he waited for Daisy to come back to him, was replaced by a light, a happiness that the better half of him that was Daisy had now returned. The movie also illustrates this by lighting Gatsby's house up head to toe in the scene, removing the colorless atmosphere and replacing it with one much more lively.
In general, the entire book is quietly dominated by the color gray, as it appears repeatedly as the plot gets darker and darker. Representing moral depravity, depression, desperation, lifelessness, and poverty, gray has become a force to be reckoned with in F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby.